ISIC also serves as the organizer for the Commercial Sensor Flow user group with the aim of democratizing machine learning, deep learning, and also serving as a safe haven for people looking to get a footing in the deep learning space. Also, we have an electrical engineer named Jane Obiekwelu with a professional expertise in international automotive regulations and standards. She currently works at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, and is the Commission's focal for the project and Qatar, Safer and Cleaner Used Vehicles for Africa. She has 7 years experience in automotive in Africa and internationally. She also she also has a natural passion for managing technical projects that contribute to progress in the continent. And lastly, we have Tom Cartwright. He's a motorcycle taxi researcher and electric mobility consultant based in Nairobi, Kenya. Currently, Tom provides technical assistance to e-mobility companies under the Powering Renewable Energy Opportunities Program. He is also the lead researcher at the African Electric Mobility Development Association, AMIDA. Tom's research and writing have been published at rest of the world. Africa is an Africa. He fixed and transportation research part D. He is currently working with research groups at TU Berlin and Institute Polytechnique on trends in the border industry in East African cities on electric mobility. Yeah. So these are the experts we have that will be coming to talk to us. We can see we have people with both the technical experience and the research experience to talk to us. Yeah, so move over to the presentations. Annika Berlin will be presenting. Also, if you have questions, you could just put down your questions in the comment box. There is a session for questions and answers. So your questions will be jotted down. All right, so over to you.
This is Annika, and yeah, sorry for not being here with you in this meeting. I'm currently traveling between Kenya and Uganda. Otherwise, I would have loved to be here with you real time. But let me thank Veronica and everyone from TONIPASH for the invitation and for organizing this very interesting event. And I'll look forward also later to see the recording and hear from all the other amazing speakers on this panel. And yeah, so again, my name is Annika. I work for the UN Environment Program. I'm based in Kenya, Nairobi. And here we've been working for quite a few years now on a global electric mobility program, which is supporting right now over 50 countries with the transition to electric mobility. And I was asked to talk a bit about, in general, the challenges for clean mobility and opportunities. And then I'll go a bit into how UNEP is supporting countries with the transition and why this is important. So it's just the content slide. So why are we talking about this topic in Africa? So the number of vehicles is growing rapidly, and it's set to double by 2050, as you can see in the graph here. And most of this growth will happen in non-OECD countries, which not includes the African countries, but also Latin American and Asian countries. And this will mean that the contribution of the transport sector to global emissions is going to increase. And that many of the conventional vehicles that are currently being used in OECD countries will end up in countries where the transition to electric vehicles is not as fast. And in Africa, actually, we talk a lot about electric two-wheelers because of the very high import numbers, as you can see here. And also, it means that the market growth in two-wheelers will actually mean that the motorcycles will surpass the number of private cars by 2040. This is just a study from McKinsey, which shows the relationships for countries, including Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Uganda, I think. So yeah, this is just to show you the numbers. And then this will lead, as I mentioned before, to a rise in global transport emissions, which is why this is an important topic for the UN Environment Programme. And you can see here that the highest growth in emissions will be from road transport. But we don't only talk about the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which are important for the climate, but also for local air pollution. As you can see in the graph, this is an example from Nairobi, Addis, and Kampala of the levels of air pollution for areas in the city. And you can see that in all cases, it's above the recommended World Health Organization standard for air quality. And this is not only due to vehicles, but in a huge extent. So what are the solutions to decarbonizing road transport in Africa? So this statistic is from the International Energy Agency, which shows the huge growth in electric cars. And here we talk about passenger four-wheelers. And as you can see here, the growth is happening mostly in China, Europe, and the United States. But it's happening exponentially. And right now, last year, the number was already at 10 million vehicles, up from about 0 just 10 years ago. And in some emerging markets, we see a similar trend. As you can see on the left side, in Africa, the number of vehicles and also the number of electric vehicle models is still very low, though growing. But you can also see how the huge growth in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Eastern Europe, which can just predict that the same will happen in Africa. This is a projection from the OECD on a number of vehicles by vehicle types. So this is like the first time was said, most of the statistics always include only electric passenger vehicles, while this one disaggregates the number of vehicles by types, including buses and 2- and 3-wheelers. And here you can see the different scenarios. So this means the B2DS means staying below the 2-degree target from the climate agreement in Paris, whereas the other one is a slower scenario. And here you can see that according to the scenario, by 2040, for example, there will be no more conventional powered electric 2- and 3-wheelers on the market. But if we talk about decarbonizing transport, it's not enough to only electrify the vehicles, because there's also other challenges such as resource consumption, land consumption, the production of these vehicles, and also other social aspects, right? That not everybody has access to a private car. And this is just what this graphic shows from UN Habitat. So usually in transport, when we talk about the environmental impacts and decarbonization, there is the ASI approach. So avoid means mostly urban planning and demand management for transport, so that we avoid the need to travel at all, which of course is the lowest emission mode, just not travel. And we have seen it a lot also now, no, like I'm not with you in Nigeria or somewhere, but no, we can stay in our countries and do video conferences, which is one avoid strategy that has been very prominent during COVID. Then there's the shift. That means changing the mode of transport, so from using a private car to public transport or walking and cycling. And then the last, where mostly electric vehicles fall in, it's the improved strategy. So if I'm taking a car or a motorbike, can this be electric? But we don't only talk just about the shift in technology, but also how a transition to a new system can be used to change, in general, how we plan and design our cities. For example, if we now introduce a new bike sharing system, right, how can we make also provide for bicycle lanes, for example, give priority to bicycles over private cars, and also offer interesting pricing solutions for customers, right, such as subscription-based leasing and so on, and then increase the general accessibility for the citizens. But then what are the main barriers to the transition to electric mobility? So we usually group them into 4 areas. One is the regulatory institutional side, which is often lack of coordination between different agencies. For example, we talk e-mobility, it means electric, so it's Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Transport, but also urban planning, and also municipal organizations and transport authorities. So all these actors have to work together for this transition. Also that electromobility, since it's a sort of new mode, it's not included in most of the existing transport policies and plans. So this is something that we support in a couple of countries, for example, to include the topic of electric mobility in transport plans. Then there are the economic and financial barriers, which is that usually electric vehicles have a higher upfront cost, but then lower operational cost, where interesting business models come in, such as pay as you go. And also, but also on the good side, that if, for example, the fuel prices goes up, as it does now, electric vehicles become much more attractive. Then we have the issue of behavior knowledge, which is often that people are not aware that these vehicles are available, or there's anxiety that the range will not be enough to reach the destinations. And then there's the topic of technical barriers, which is where we focus on a lot in our global working groups through the program. How can we, for example, support the development of standards for high quality vehicles, support interoperability between charging infrastructure, but also between countries, for example, that an electric two-wheeler on the roads in Kenya would also be able to be imported, for example, to Uganda or Nigeria. Then the connection with the electricity grid.
All right, thank you so much. All right, thank you, Miss Anika. She's apologized for not being here, but then she sent this. So next up, we're having some polls that will pop up on your screen. Kindly just answer the polls question so that we could just get a little bit of information about who is joining the meeting. Yes, so while the poll is on, our next presentation will be by Isaac Aita. Isaac Aita, are you ready?
Yes, yes, Duncan, I'm ready.
Okay, so you're up next.
Sure, I'll start presenting my screen now. Bianchit, I think you have to give me permission to share my screen.
Okay, okay, we are on that.
Sure.
Anthony, can you help us with that? So while we wait for Aisa to begin his presentation, we should just take a few notes from what Annika said. She made mention of how 2 and 3 wheelers are the focal points of clean mobility in Africa and what is moving the market, and about the challenges being faced. We talked about technical challenges and other challenges in Africa. So it's up to us to look at how these 2 and 3 wheelers, because they're mostly seen in rural areas and peri-urban areas, and this is where most of the population or the rural population use in transportation. So I think I agree with her when she said 2 and 3 wheelers are what we use to break into the African market when it comes to clean mobility. Anthony, are we good?
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, not this Anthony, but the Anthony of TONIPASH Energy. Anthony, you're muted just in case you're trying to say something.
Hi guys. I don't know. Can you guys see the poll? Are you participating? Hello?
Yes, we can see the poll.
Okay.
We can see the poll, and I think we've answered the poll. So we're waiting for Isaac's presentation.
Yeah, while we are waiting, let's just give everyone the next.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to be given permission to share my screen because it says here that the host has disabled participation.
Okay, so while that is ongoing, please try and answer the polls on your screen. Just try and answer the polls on your screen.
Answered.
Yes, I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see your screen. You can go ahead.
All right. So thank you once again for having me on this event. So my name is Isaac Atiabugbila. I am the head of research and development at Solar Taxi. So without wasting much time, let's dive into it. So this is going to be the layout of my presentation. I'll be talking about the trajectory of Solar Taxi so far, where we started and where we are now, what we do at Solar Taxi. And from there, I'll just talk a little bit about how EVs have evolved, and we will look at the types of EVs, just so you know, there are different types of EVs out there, and then it would be nice to know that they're out there. And then we just take a look at what makes an EV an EV, so basically an electric vehicle architecture. Nothing too technical, just something so all of us will know. And then after that, we'll then get to the crux of the matter of why we are here. We talk about some of the opportunities in the electric vehicle space, some of the challenges, and then the prospects. Obviously, some of these have already been explained by the first speaker, Anika. So I'll do my best to add up to what she may not have said. All right. So Solar Taxi's trajectory. So just like any other project that starts, or any other work that starts as a dream, Solar Taxi equally started as a dream as well. So you can see the image on your right. That was the idea behind Solar Taxi, having a vehicle that could be powered by solar panels. So that was the very first prototype of Solar Taxi. And obviously there were some hiccups with this particular design, but we were able to learn a lot from it. And the learnings we got from there propelled us into our next stage, which was the piloting phase. And then from the piloting phase, we went on to the business phase, and now we are in the development and then the training phase. So in the project phase, which started somewhere around 2018, we were basically researching into the technology, whether electric vehicles could be used here in Africa. We're also looking at how we could harness enough energy to keep our electric vehicles moving. So basically, in 2018, which we dubbed the project phase, it was more or less of looking into the technology and then looking into the feasibility of its feasibility as well. So fast forward 2019, after we were able to learn one or two things from the project phase in 2018, we then moved into the pilot phase. So in the pilot phase, we decided to test some assembled vehicles. So some of these vehicles were imported and then were assembled here in Ghana, and we tested them against different financial and then business models, just trying to understand the customer needs, and we try to understand what we can offer. And fast forward, and then from there, we then went into the business phase where we now got clients on board. We had people who were patronizing patronized our products because we were offering packages, or we were giving them offerings that no one else was doing. So some of the things we were giving them, we're providing courier services and then franchise services as well. We were selling some of these vehicles, and we were also renting or leasing some of these vehicles. And to top it all off, we also provided free maintenance for a particular period of time, because we realized that there weren't a lot of EV experts or EV workshops in the country. So these were some of the packages that we offered them. And then fast forward from 2020 till now, which we call the development and the training phase, where we are trying to build up on what we've learned over the years. And also trying to localize some of the production of some of the equipment and then some of the machinery that are used in electric vehicles today. So among some of those, which we'll get to see some of those as the presentation goes on. So what do we do at Solar Taxi? Just like I mentioned, we rent and then sell cars. You can see the image over there. We also rent and then sell scooters as well. Aside that, as part of the research and development, which I am in charge of, we also convert vehicles from fuel into electric. So on the right, we have a normal Haojin CC motorbike, which is a very common motorbike found here in Ghana. We took that and then we converted it from fuel into electric. So far, we have done 4 conversions. One was just a prototype. The second one, we did that in collaboration. We did that as part of a project we were working on with the University of Bochum in Germany, as well as the University of Energy and Natural Resources here in Ghana. And then the other 2, we converted those for GIZ Togo. Also, we build lithium-ion battery packs for 2-wheelers and then 3-wheelers, because during the project and then the pilot phase, one of the things we experienced was that the battery packs which we were importing were not standing the test of time, probably due to environmental constraints. And also, we did not have enough power over the technology. Anytime the batteries went bad, or the batteries were not functioning the way we expected them to, it took quite a lot of effort just to diagnose and then find out what was happening with those batteries. So in order to curb those situations, we decided to go into producing our own battery packs. And as I speak now, about 90% of our 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers are running on the battery packs that we built ourselves. Aside that too, we also ran a training program for riders, which was, this program or this training became imperative because we realized that the riders of 2-wheelers and then 3-wheelers here in Ghana, because they were used to the conventional vehicles, anytime at all we gave them our electric vehicles or our electric 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, they ended up crashing them. Yes, they ended up crashing them, and all that was because they were not used to how the electric vehicles work. So electric vehicles, immediately you turn on your ignition or your key, you are good to start moving, which is not the case for conventional motorbikes, where there's a clutch and then there are gears and all that. So because of that, we decided to introduce the riders training program, where we train riders on how to handle and then ride an electric vehicle as well. We also have a ride hailing and then delivery app. So we have a ride hailing and then delivery app. And then among other things, we also do EV assembly, we do EV maintenance, modeling and then design, where the modeling and design is very imperative because we want to go, because of the route we want to take off. designing and then building locally some of the parts of an EV, there's a need for us to start modeling some of those parts and then designing some of those parts ourselves. And aside that, we also have a female engineering training program. So I don't know about other countries, but here in Ghana, the transport industry is a male-dominated industry. It's a male-dominated from the technicians or the auto mechanics or the mechanics to the operators of the vehicles themselves, even to management. It's all male-dominated. I think just recently I realized that they are beginning to take females, but still, it's still predominantly male. And then, so for us at Solar Taxi, we wanted to go a different route, and that was to train more female engineers who can troubleshoot and then repair electric vehicles should they break down. So this is a little bit of what we do. So now let's move on to the evolution of EVs. I know that, or at least from our findings, it looks as if EVs are a new phenomenon in our part of the world. But in actual fact, EVs have been in existence for a very long time. As far back as the 1830s, EVs had existed. Obviously, there were the rudimentary forms of EVs, but nonetheless, they are still considered EVs, and that continued all the way to the 1910s, where EVs became much more popular because the technology was growing. We had a number of people who were coming up with new technology. But after that, in the 1930s, the 1970s, the hype on EVs dipped, mainly because one, the prices of fuel were cheaper as at that point, and then two, the battery industry had not experienced any form of innovation. EVs run solely, or some EVs run solely on batteries, and we can say that batteries are the more or less the heart of an EV. So if the batteries are not seeing any form of improvement, then obviously there'll be no need for EVs. So around that time, those were the reasons why the hype on EVs declined. And then after some time, the hype, the market on EV was revamped again because the prices of fuel or oil price had gone up, and also because there had been significant innovation in the battery space. I think around this time, Panasonic had probably made their first commercialized lithium-ion cells. So, and then from 2010 till now, which we saw from Annika's presentation, that EVs have been increasing at a significant pace. So, like I mentioned, we do have different types of EVs out there. Even though they are all considered EVs, but depending on one or two factors, we are able to classify EVs. So we have the battery electric vehicles, or BEVs. So these EVs are the electric vehicles that run solely on batteries. They don't have any other form of energy involved. It's solely run on batteries, lithium-ion batteries. They mostly go for lithium-ion batteries. So those are battery electric vehicles. We also have the hybrid electric vehicles that have a combination of both the electrical part, which is the batteries and the motor, and also the internal combustion engine. So mostly for the hybrid vehicles, the internal combustion engine is like the main propellant, and then the motor and the battery are like there to support. And mostly for those ones, the battery cannot be recharged by plugging it into a standalone charger. Normally, the batteries for hybrid electric vehicles are recharged when the vehicle is in motion. But aside that, we also have another variant of the hybrid electric vehicles we call the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles simply have a plug-in that you can plug into your charging infrastructure, and then you can charge your batteries. And then we also have the fuel cell electric vehicles. Those ones use an alternative form of fuel, which we call the fuel cell. Mostly it's a hydrogen form of uses hydrogen as its main chemical compound. So these are some of the categories of electric vehicles that we have. Normally, when you see them on the road, it's very difficult to know whether this particular EV is a battery electric vehicle or a hybrid or a plug-in or fuel cell, unless, of course, it's written somewhere, maybe at the back or beside the vehicles, or maybe you know from your OEM that that there's a hybrid or there's a battery electric or a plug-in. So let's take a look at a little bit of EV architecture. This is a very simple architecture. So all EVs, regardless of whether they are a battery electric, they are fuel cell, they are plug-in or hybrid electric vehicle, they will have some component of an electric motor. They will have some component of a battery bank, and also a power converter. And then depending on whether you're using a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle or just a plain hybrid electric vehicle, you will have an onboard charger and then a charging plug, right? And obviously these components can be combined in so many different ways. You can have one with the drive motor in front of the wheel, that gives you a front wheel drive. You can have one with a drive motor behind the wheel, that gives you a rear wheel drive. You can have one with a single motor or double or two motors. You can even have some where the motors are embedded in the wheels as well. So depending on whoever is the manufacturer of the EV, they can combine some of these parts. They can combine some of these parts together to achieve whatever it is they want to do. But generally, this is the architecture of an EV. And now we move on to the reason why we are here, to explore the opportunities, the challenges, and then the prospects of electric, of clean mobility. So some of the examples I'm going to give here are going to be specific to what Solar Taxi has been doing, and then and also what Solar Taxi has experienced. So one of the opportunities I can see that is present in the EV space is the creation of decent work. What do I mean by creation of decent work? I mean, there are so many in Africa. We rely a lot on transportation for almost all the things that we do, which is the same for everywhere else. Be it going to the market, going to other forms of workplace, or even just traveling to work. We rely a lot on transportation, and I feel like this is a way for us to create decent jobs from there, especially for those who run ride-hailing or ride-sharing applications, like the likes of Bolt and Yango and then InDriver. I feel this is a time they can capitalize on. The fact that petrol or fuel prices are rising, and then EVs, I mean, electricity is generally cheaper. So I think in Ghana here, the price of petrols have risen to an astronomical figure since the beginning of the year. So being able to capitalize on the fact that electricity is relatively cheaper than fuel here in Ghana, I think some of these services will see a rise in their services. Aside that too, we can talk about people who own maintenance or repair workshops. There is a chance for them to also capitalize on the EV space. So in Africa, or let me say in Ghana, there are very few people who have enough knowledge on how to work or repair EVs, which means that if you are an individual or a company and then you are able to repair electric vehicles, this is the time for you to reap a lot of benefits, because you'll be in a space that is growing, that has grown and is still growing. So yeah, so this is one of the many opportunities that we have available for us in the EV space. And also we can also talk about affordable transportation alternatives. Because of the rise in fuel, obviously the cost of transportation has increased astronomically as well. However, with the introduction of EVs, especially in Africa, where we have the tuk-tuks and then the Okadas and then the trotro in the case of Africa, if some of those things are running on EVs, you can expect that transportation cost reduces, and that also means that the livelihood of people are not affected as much. But aside that too, one of the findings that we got here at Solar Taxi is that EVs are relatively expensive, way more expensive than their fuel counterpart. That is in terms of buying or ownership. But afterwards, the operational cost is much cheaper. And obviously, we know that in Africa, not many of us have enough capital to buy an EV. So what then is the alternative, right? What then is the alternative if you can't buy an EV outright, right? So that is why in Solar Taxi, we also do the converted vehicle, we convert vehicles as well. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the things we've done is to convert fuel motorbikes into electric bikes, and we've already done 4 of those. And as I speak with you now, all 4 of those are fully functional. They require very little maintenance, just as a normal EV would. And based on research that we've done, the cost of ownership is relatively cheaper than actually buying a full-fledged EV outright. Aside that, there are some countries that also offer car conversions where they'll convert fuel cars into electric cars. Obviously, there are some policies and regulations surrounding that aspect, but either way, I feel like this is also another cheaper alternative than owning or than purchasing an EV, a full-fledged EV outright. Aside that, one of the opportunities we can also talk about is skill acquisition. So at Solar Taxi, we do a number of trainings. We do a number of trainings, both in person and then online, or even in the form of internships, where we are happy to share the knowledge we've gained throughout the years with people within the space. Because one of the many challenges, as you see later, is that in the EV space, there are very few professionals, or there are very few professional workshops or individuals that can actually work on an EV for you, especially in this part of our continent, because EVs are seen as relatively new technology, right? So how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that the anxiety that people have in owning an EV, because they feel like when I own an EV and then it breaks down, I want the people to work on them for me? How do we bridge that gap? We offer trainings in that aspect, and I feel and I know that there is a very good platform for people that are fresh university graduates, or even people that already own their own workshops. This is the time for them to get on the wagon, because in Europe, by 2030, a lot of the streets in Europe will be full of electric vehicles, and that trend will also will transcend to other continents as well. So I feel it's time for us in Africa to also build enough capacity in that aspect, so that when the time comes and then we have a lot of EVs on the road, we'll also be able to we'll be up to the task of working on them, or we'll also pick up the task of being able to keep them functional on the roads. Of the opportunities that other speakers will also touch on. So there are quite a few of infrastructure. What do I mean? I'm talking about China. I can tell you for a fact that not many EV companies in Ghana assemble their vehicles from scratch. As at the moment, I know of 3 EV companies in Ghana, of which Solar Taxi is one of them. And out of the 3, only Solar Taxi does their own assembly here in Ghana. So it means that Solar Taxi alone cannot assemble enough vehicles for the growing population in Ghana. So there's a challenge, right? So this is quite a challenge, because it means that most of the EVs that will be coming into the country are already assembled and they are being sold in the country, which I feel is not the right way for a company that wants to build technical capacity and technical know-how in the industry. Aside that, I'm talking about charging stations. In fact, there are no public charging stations around in Ghana as I speak. I don't know about other African countries, but in Ghana, I don't know of any public charging stations around. So it makes it quite difficult, because that's one of the problems people have with adopting EVs, because they have this anxiety that what if I'm on the road and then I need to charge it? What do I do? there are no charging stations, so they tend to rethink their options as well. Aside that, we also have inadequate qualified personnel and workshop services to repair our vehicles, which I've already touched on initially. We also lack policies and then regulations, and that is true. As we speak now, I don't know of any policies in place for the introduction or even the adoption of EVs in the country. I know that there are government bodies that are working on it as we speak, but as it stands now, nothing has materialized yet. So nothing has materialized yet. And that is an issue because once these vehicles come into the country, they need to be roadworthy. So if there are no policies and regulations, how do we license these vehicles to run on the road, right? So that is one issue. Aside that, there's also there's also the high cost of purchasing electric vehicles. Like I said, electric vehicles are very expensive. They are super expensive, right? They are super expensive, and given the workforce in Africa, not many people are equipped to actually buy electric vehicles outright. And even the cost even becomes higher when you have to replace the battery packs once they've reached their end of life, right? And also other challenges include long charging times and also the unreliable power supply from the national grid. Some years ago, Ghana was experiencing what we call DIMSOL, more formally called the load shedding. So imagine if something like that is to repeat itself. It means owning an electric vehicle is going to be more of a burden than it is an opportunity. And there's also the range anxiety where people.
All right. Hi, Isaac. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut it short here.
No problem. No problem.
But then I have some questions for you, which we're going to discuss on that during the panel discussion.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right. So we're not able to finish Amnika's presentation, but so we play that right now so that we could just finish up our presentation. Yeah.
Sure. Then let me stop sharing right now and then.
All right, thank you so much. So while we were trying to put up Amnika's presentation, he spoke about skills development, which was something that really triggered me up because one thing that is lacking within this industry or the clean mobility adoption is skills development. People have concerns about skills development and skills transferability. Can the skills that people have from the normal fuel car fuel mobility be transferred into the electric mobility and stuff like that? And I was glad when he talked about female engineering training. That's gender equality, which is very good because gender balance is one area that we see the whole world trying to reach. Yeah, so thank you so much, Isaac. It was really an eye-opening. Are we ready with Amnika's? Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, okay. So Mr. Anthony, we are waiting for Amnika's presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, you could just drop them in the chat box. I'm already seeing questions popping up in the chat box. So you could just drop your questions. We'll discuss that during the panel session after the whole presentations. Okay, so while we wait for that, I'm sorry, I think we're having a bit of a little issue. But while we wait for that, a poll will pop up on your screen. Please do well to answer the poll. So just quickly answer the poll while we wait for the video. Thank you. I can see answers coming in. We can still do that. Can we just answer the polls, please? Thank you. Okay, seems we're having a bit of technical issues, so we'll just move ahead to the next presentation while we wait for the Anipa's recording. Jane Obiakwelu, are you ready for us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you very much. So you could go ahead with your presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you let me know if you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Another question, is it just my screen you see? Do you see any other thing apart from the clean mobility screen?
We see next slide, and we see your.
Do you see my notes? Okay.
We see your notes as well.
Okay, all right. So let me ensure. All right, so I will proceed. My name is Jane Obikwelu. I work with the United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe as an Associate Economic Affairs Officer. And I'm also the UNECE's focal point for the project of safer and cleaner used vehicles for Africa. My presentation will be, I'll be focused more on regulations and the regulatory aspects of used vehicles and new vehicles and all that. Okay. Is someone else on this slide? Sorry. Okay. All right. I would like to speak a little bit about the projects I'm working on, which I already said earlier, safer and cleaner used vehicles for Africa. This is a project that is being implemented jointly with UNEP, UNECE, the organization I work for, UNECE, UNEP, FIA, and CETA. And this project came about after some research were done in Africa and also in Europe and some other exporting countries on the quality of used vehicles that are being exported and imported. And these pictures you see here, this tire here and here, and also some of these pictures were taken at the ports of Netherlands. These are vehicles that were to be exported out of Netherlands into Africa. And what was noticed was that most of the vehicles that were leaving this exporting ports into Africa were poor used vehicles. They were high in mileage, highly polluting. Most of them had some of their parts dismantled, like airbags and the rest. So this was what led to the launch of this project. And the main goal of this project is to develop and harmonize minimum requirements between exporting and importing regions that will be necessary for the transfer of used vehicles from one region to another. Okay. I would like to give a bit of background information to this point, to my presentation. First, on the issue of road safety, only about 2.8% of the world's vehicle fleet is in Africa.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Please, can you mute?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Do I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Okay.
please continue.
Okay, all right. So I would like to give a bit of background information, which I think is really important to discuss. First, in the issue of road safety, only about 2.8% of the world's vehicle fleet is in Africa. So Africa is the least motorized region, but in a very ironic way, 23% of road traffic deaths, road traffic fatalities happen in Africa. Compared to other regions, Africa has the highest amount of road traffic deaths, but only has 2.8% of the world's vehicle fleet. Also, looking at the growth of vehicle fleets, 85% of the vehicle fleets currently in Africa are imported used vehicles. So 85% of the vehicles that are driven in Africa are new, both passenger cars, the buses, are used vehicles are not new. And by 2050, the African vehicle fleet is projected to be increased by 5 times. So this will tell you the amount of used vehicles in Africa is still on the rise. Only about 15% of the population or 25% of the population, can actually afford brand new vehicles. And even in some instances, some of these new vehicles don't even have the required regulations to protect the road users and the passengers. Other effects of vehicle fleets, the mortality rate from air pollution has increased by 57% in the past 3 decades in Africa due to the quality of vehicles that are being driven in Africa. In this slide, this is a map that was a study carried out by UNEP. As I mentioned earlier, UNEP carried out a study to see the quality of vehicles that are driven in Africa. And this map shows the current state of regulation. And so far, for imported vehicles, only three countries, I think this is South Africa, Egypt, and Sudan, and also Seychelles, have completely banned the import of used vehicles. Mind you, importing used vehicles is not bad. It's just the kind of quality of the used vehicles that are imported that are causing that is a cause for concern in Africa. Then we have just on the northern region, we have some countries that have good to very good regulation. Then the remaining parts of the continent, they have weak or no existing regulation. And even in instances where you have good regulations or regulations in place, implementation at the national level is very poor. However, this is a map this is a map of 2020. There is a 2022 map. Currently, the regions in West Africa and East Africa have currently adopted some regional standards, which are in the process of implementation. But at 2020, most of the countries in Africa had little to no regulation. The process to standardization, I would like to start from policies down to guidelines and operations. And policies, these are regional or international frameworks. Regional frameworks like what ECOWAS agreed to. ECOWAS have the 2020 directive, which they agreed on, and the EAC, East African Community, have their own directive, their own directive, which they also accepted in 2021. So these are policies. And some examples of these international framework policies are the United Nations 1958, 1997, 1998 agreements. I heard my colleague Isaac speaking about regulations, all sorts of regulations from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles to buses, all sorts of vehicles that you could ever think of. They have regulations. They are all regulated at an international level. It's just about being part of this regulatory body and learning from the work of experience that they put into place. From policies, you go to law. So once a country or a region accepts a policy, the next point is passing this policy into national legislation. Once it's been passed into national legislation, it becomes a regulation. So you have an international framework becoming your national regulation. Then from there, it becomes standards of the country, and then it goes down to the operations and the guidelines where you have the road traffic authorities, the traffic wardens, and all that. So that's in the area of standardization. I would also like to speak about the technical elements for better vehicles, regardless of the kind of vehicles you're driving, whether they are internal combustion engines, whether it's electric vehicle, they all need to adhere and have certain requirements. On the area of safe vehicles, generally for a vehicle to be termed technically safe, they need to adhere to certain safety elements and emission elements. So the safety parts of the vehicles we're talking about, these are the passive safety, active safety, general safety, lighting and light signal. Also noise emission should be here. I forgot to put that on the list. So for a vehicle to be deemed safe to be driven, it needs to have all these safety elements in place. What are these safety elements? An example, passive safety, for instance, these are safety elements that come into play when a vehicle has an accident, and it needs to, passive safety elements of the vehicle protects you or mitigates against serious or severe damage after an accident. Example of passive safety elements, these are the safety belts, these are the helmets when you're on a bike. An example, these are the headrests, these are the frontal impact collision, side collision. Active safety elements, these are elements that keep your vehicle driving safe to prevent it from having any accident. Examples of these are your brake system, your steering wheels, your electronic stability control. So sometimes when you have vehicles that are imported into Africa, a lot of them may not even have any of these safety elements in place. That's why when you have accidents, it's usually very fatal in this part, in Africa to be precise. I will not touch on these other safety elements, so I don't take too much of the time. Emission. So emission, emission are standards that there are different emission levels when it comes to having safe vehicles. There's Euro 1, Euro 2, Euro 3, Euro 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So here, this deals with emission of tailpipe. These are tailpipe emissions, which can also be called exhaust emissions. So we have technologies that are attached to engines that have been put into place to reduce the emission that are coming out of the vehicle. So other than the pollutants coming out of the vehicle, another thing to also notice are the quality of the fuels. While the emission part of the vehicle takes care of pollutants like nitric oxide, hydrocarbon, carbon dioxide, the fuel element takes quality fuel ensures that the sulfuric pollutants coming from fuel are minimal or non-existent. So whether you're using, even if this emission elements may not apply so much to EV, electric mobility, these other elements, passive safety, active safety, general safety, these are all very important parts of any vehicle you're driving. Speaking on emissions a little bit, this is just a pie chart showing the level and amount of greenhouse gas emissions by sector. And if you look at it, the most polluting parts of the sector is the transport sector. Next to the transport sector, we have electric power generation. We'll speak a little bit about that in the next slides. And speaking on transport sector, so going down into the transport sector part of things now, distribution of CO2 emission from transport sector, you would see that majority of the carbon dioxide being emitted from the transport sector comes from passenger vehicles. Because I think even in countries where you have very good public transport system in place, you still have a lot of passenger vehicles on the road. Next to that, we have medium to heavy trucks, and then shipping, aviation buses, then we have 2 3-wheelers and rails and the rest. So I would like to ask a question, because you're here talking about clean mobility, is electrification the only way to clean mobility? You could answer that. I don't know what you think, but from my experience working on the project of Safer and Cleaner Use Vehicles in Africa, I've gotten to understand certain things. Number one, I can say electric mobility is part of the solution, but not enough to achieve total decarbonization. If you're going to look at Africa, for instance, a country where 85% of the vehicles are imported use vehicles, to start with any discussion relating to clean mobility, we have to address internal combustion engines and the in-fleet vehicles. Electric mobility is the future and it can't be stopped, definitely. But I'm a believer in I don't just believe, okay, you stop using internal combustion engines and then let's switch to electric mobility. I believe in gradually improving the quality of the vehicle fleet, thereby getting better atmospheric condition by reducing the emission that our vehicles and transport sector, or electric sector, or energy sector are releasing into the atmosphere. So electric mobility is part of the solution, but is not enough to achieve total decarbonization. Secondly, vehicle electrification with renewable energy sources is key to achieving sustainable mobility. Why do I say so? If we are moving from fossil fuels as our fuel, if we are moving from fossil fuels in internal combustion engines to going to electric vehicles, definitely that's going to improve it's going to lead to decarbonization. But if we are going to using if we are going to be using electric sources, power generation sources that are still dependent on fossil fuels, I feel it's just like moving the amount of decarbonization or decarbonization from electric vehicles back to power generation. So it's not just looking at electric vehicles, it's also looking at the source of electricity, the generation of electricity, where are we getting the source from? So it's like a full circle thing. You can't just focus on one aspect without focusing on the other aspect. The third part is, while e-mobility is the future of mobility, extra attention needs to be given to improving the quality of the current African vehicle fleet, which is something I've already spoke about in this presentation. The African vehicle fleet needs to be properly regulated, and where there is regulation, national level implementation needs to take effect. If not, Africa will just keep receiving anything, end-of-life vehicles that are not even going to be driven in certain countries will move from their country to Africa. So it's something we have to really look at. That's very important to me. You have this thing on screen. Okay, sorry. All right, so opportunities. So going back to the discussion here, opportunities in e-mobility, clean mobility in Africa, and looking at opportunities. Electrification is a key part to transformation of the mobility industry, no doubt about that. So it's something that we can't avoid. It's something that is already there. There's momentum building up in different parts of the world. In some countries in Europe, by 2050, 2040, they are hoping to have the vehicle fleet to be completely electrified. So electrification is very key to transformation of the mobility industry, in the sense that it reduces greenhouse gas emission. That's very key. It also presents an opportunity to move from completely dependence on fossil fuel for mobility. I think this is a place that is also good for governments that are looking to create cleaner energy sources. Because I feel whenever there is a challenge, there's going to be an opportunity. So if we are looking to move from our dependence on fossil fuel to electric vehicles, it will open more avenues to seeing possible ways to generating electricity from cleaner sources, also using cleaner mobility as well. Also present an opportunity for government to consider other important forms of transportation integration. For instance, looking at opportunities in e-mobility space, just like my colleague spoke about, Isaac. Like I was in Cote d'Ivoire a while ago, and something the government is planning is trying to electrify the transport system. So it also gives the opportunity for government to start looking at electrification of buses, improving the rail system by looking at an electric buses system, also electric rails and all that. Then also gives an opportunity for private businesses and enterprises to become early investors into the e-mobility industry, like what Solar Taxi is doing, where you have private individuals going into the e-mobility space by creation of going into the business of maybe importing or producing electric scooters, electric bicycles, and all that. So going back to the challenges we were speaking about, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of work to be done, I believe. Lack of proper policies and regulations, this is the most important on my list, because without this, we will just move from importing poor quality internal combustion engines to importing poor quality electric vehicles that are probably not having the right form of regulations, or maybe have reached their end of lives and should not even be driven, being imported into Africa. And also something to notice that is not just specific to Africa, but worldwide. Electric vehicle parts like the REES, which is a rechargeable electrical energy storage system, also known as the batteries, is made from a wide range of materials, diverse materials. So sometimes regulating these products can be a bit challenging, but there's a lot of ongoing work to make regulation more harmonized. There's a risk of electricity grid overload and access to electricity. We've spoken about electricity. I think electricity has come up severally in this events. The electricity situation in Africa is not the best, unfortunately. I think about if you're looking at electricity generation, you're looking at maybe just on the northern side, countries like Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria have about 99% of their population that have access to electricity. Then on the southern region, South Africa is doing a good job. I think about 94% of their population have access to electricity generation. Then if you look at the west and the east, I think you have Kenya, you have Ghana, where about 85% of the population have access to electricity. So other than that, I would say just about 17% of the whole of Africa have their population where just 85% of their population have access to electricity. So even if we are going to e-mobility, something we have to talk about is the electricity grid. Are we generating enough electricity to be able to handle the surge or the increase in electric vehicles? Electric cars are only as green as their energy sources, which I already spoke about. It's not just about electric vehicles. Okay, the power that is being generated, where is it generated from? Because majority of the generation of electricity in Africa are from fossil fuels. And it's like moving, as I said, moving the level of carbonization from one sector to another, just moving the pollution from one sector to another. So electric cars are good, but they're only as green as their energy sources. There's also something they call risk of thermal propagation associated with lithium-ion batteries. The majority of the batteries in electric vehicles, I think almost all are made from lithium-ion, though there are some ongoing research happening in Japan, where they're trying to look for more, would I say, for lack of a better word, I'll say better materials to make electric batteries. So thermal propagation, this is where you have To put it shortly, without going into too much technical detail, this is like a process of overheating of the battery, and worst case scenario, it can lead to explosion. And what causes this thermal propagation is usually overcharging of the battery, and also, funny enough, you have issues relating to temperature. And we know Africa is in a tropical zone. A lot of countries in Africa are very highly tropic, so you have really high temperatures. And sometimes these temperatures can affect the quality of the lithium battery, which can cause thermal propagation. Lack of technical know-how, maintenance and operation. I think this is all in the place of capacity building, and those are some of the challenges. But I believe with the proper interest from the government and the right people and maybe the right politicians, these are things that can be dealt with and handled appropriately. Prospects, governments should encourage prospects. I would say, in order to encourage electric vehicles in Africa, e-mobility, and generally good vehicles, I think government should look into encourage the import of EVs by producing tax incentives. I think Mauritius is an African country. They've also done something similar, where they've given tax incentives for the importation of electric vehicles, and this has over the time increased the amount of electric vehicles coming to the country. I think this can be cut across not just electric vehicles, but also ICEs, where you could give these tax incentives to improve the quality of vehicles that are being imported into the region or the countries where you are. With access to adequate power, you can charge up anywhere, at home, at work. These are some of the great opportunities these are some of the great prospects with electric vehicles. You don't have to go to the fuel station. You can have your own charging your own charging spot in the office, at home. You can go to work, and while you're working, your battery is charging. While you're sleeping, the battery of your vehicle is charging. And you could also focus on off-peak hours where people are asleep and the load on the power grid is less, and that period you could use to charge your electric vehicles. Electric cars are the future of mobility and cannot be avoided regardless of the challenges. So I know it's something that there are challenges, but I feel the challenges could also lead to much great developments. With the challenges, I said, with challenges come opportunities. With these opportunities come problem solving, and I believe improvements all around. Africa needs to catch up, and this would happen. It may not happen overnight. It may not happen in a day. It may not happen in a year. It may not happen in 2 years. It may not happen in 5 years. But I believe with the right implementation, regulations, and active participation of all the parties, from the politicians to the government to the technical agencies, bodies, to the road users like you and I, obeying our traffic rules, regulations, and keeping our cars in a healthy, roadworthy condition, I believe all this is something that can happen. We could join the fleet of countries that are going towards improving and moving towards electric vehicle mobility in their region. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go out of time, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jane. It was nice hearing you speak. I was happy when you talked about importation of vehicles and electricity, because one thing we all know that is, if you're talking about electric mobility, a major component of it is electricity, because that is what we will use to charge the electric vehicles. So I have a lot of questions and comments for you, but we'll discuss that during the panel session. Mr. Anthony, I don't know if is the recording ready to be played? If it's ready, we could just go ahead with that before Tom Cartwright's round up with his own presentation. You can keep your questions coming in. Okay, so we'll just go ahead with the next presentation. Mr. Tom Cartwright, are you available?
Yes, I am. Yeah, let me just share my screen.
Okay.
If you can allow me to share my screen, please.
Okay, I'll do just start. Okay, can we make Thomas Cartwright a co-host so that he could share his screen?
Is that Anthony or who needs to make that change?
Tom, can you confirm if you can share now, please?
No, I cannot share my screen yet. You might need to make me co-host.
Recording in progress.
Tom, can you check? Can you try now? Try again, please.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm still not able to. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Alternatively, if you have my slides, we could also present it from your side. I don't know what's easier.
Hello, Tom. Can you share now?
No, I still can't share. I'm not a co-host.
Oh, sorry. I just made you. Okay, I just made you a co-host now. You can try again.
Now I can. Thank you. Cool. Great to meet everybody here. I'll go through this quickly because I think we're a little bit behind schedule here. So I'm just going to be talking about electric mobility as a business. So a couple of these statistics, Jane and others have very well laid out for all of us, so I don't need to spend too much time here. There's tens of millions of vehicles across Africa. 2- and 3-wheelers are expanding quite quickly. Although one other thing to point out is that also government regulations around 2- and 3-wheelers, which are the best case for electrification right now, are all over the place. For those in Lagos, you certainly don't need me to tell you that. People in Kampala either, right? There's been a lot of attempts and failures at bans, but it leaves it in a legal limbo, which complicates things a little bit. So Okadas, Pen-Pens, million names, Jakartas, what have you. But they've been sweeping across the continent. In some places, I know Okadas have been around since the 80s, Bodas since the 90s. In Tanzania, they've only recently entered. But basically, they've been booming, and they're still entering new markets like Malawi and Mozambique really recently. So in some places, they're commercial, right? Motorcycle taxis driving 80 to 120 kilometers a day, which matters when we think about electric vehicle operations. And in some cases, for example, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Senegal, they're primarily personal use. There's a really big difference too between East and West Africa in these things. There's almost zero personal use in East Africa, but quite a bit in certain countries in West Africa. I know that's not the case in other ones. So I'm thinking about renewables in Africa. Obviously, if this is going to be clean, like Jane and others have pointed out, it needs to be coming from renewables. However, when we talk about the grid, again, this is something that differs hugely across the continent, hugely. So, I know Nigeria, Togo, Benin have very, very dirty grids, right? Lots of fossil fuels on the grid. Uganda is 90% renewable. Kenya is 80% renewable. So there are certain countries which are already heavily reliant on hydro. Uganda is 90% hydro. Kenya has a lot of geothermal. It has wind. So there's a lot of potential, especially for solar across the continent, that's very evenly distributed. Some places have geothermal potential. Some places have wind potential. So this is something that we need to make sure that we're expanding at the same time. It's also important to be thinking about interconnections, right? So for example, Niger and Chad, right? They've got a huge amount of space, a huge amount of sun, maybe not as much demand. Great, let's put a lot of solar there. Let's connect them to Nigeria. Let's connect them to Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and clean up some of those grids. So the other really key thing that is creating this opportunity for electric vehicles is dropping battery costs. So as you can see, battery costs have dropped for lithium ion, which is the primary, set of battery chemistries that we need to be thinking about here. It dropped by over 90% over a decade, which is crazy. Previously, you were paying like $1,100 per kilowatt hour. Now you're paying around $150, although recently there's been, of course, a lot of price volatility. This is putting vehicle prices within reach. So yes, the cost of the battery is the #1 determiner in the cost of an electric vehicle. But that's also why 2- and 3-wheelers are the perfect option, because the batteries are so much smaller, right? You need only a battery of something between 2 to 5 kilowatt hours for a motorcycle, maybe 3 to 8 kilowatt hours for a tuk-tuk, keke, whatever you want to call it. But for a 4-wheeler vehicle, you're talking 60 kilowatt hours. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It's a different situation. And for a very long time in Africa, 4-wheeler EVs are going to be for the elite and not for the average person. But that's not true for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So the other really key thing that's creating opportunity here is grid capacity. So, there's increasing access to the grid across the continent. Obviously, again, to generalize like that about all of Africa is a little bit useless, but some places are really ahead, and overall there's progress across the continent. Of course, rural areas do still have the worst access to electricity, and even when places have access to electricity, in some cases they have it for very few hours of the day. I lived in Bangui in Central African Republic for a while. Technically, we were part of the 5% of the country that had access to electricity, and yet electricity was on for about 8 hours a day. So then moving into kind of the challenges, what makes it difficult to transition to EVs? Subsidies for petrol. This is really important. With the recent petrol spikes and the war in Europe and all of that, the cost of oil has gone through the roof, the cost of petrol has gone through the roof, but some places have been heavily subsidizing petrol. So Nigeria really stands out, really heavily subsidizes petrol, makes it a much more difficult place to transition to EVs as a result. But in neighboring countries and across the continent, that level of subsidization is nowhere near that, right? So in Uganda right now, the cost of petrol is insane. It's almost $2 a liter. Tanzania, it's like $1.50. Kenya, it's higher than that. I was just in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. There's a huge expansion of cheap Chinese electric mopeds that are just booming across the city, where previously nobody really used mopeds for personal use, like little scooters. Nobody used them. But because of the cost of oil and because these little electric scooters are only $700, right? You talk about expensive EVs, that's not it. That's a very cheap EV. $700 for this little thing. They're booming across the city because the cost of electricity is so much lower. So vehicle costs have come down quite a bit, but they're still not quite as low. You're working with used importers, like people have pointed out. They're very cheap, relatively speaking, for a car, sedan, SUV, whatever you want. You're looking at something between $4,000 and $12,000, which is still much, much lower than an EV equivalent. Motorcycles are closer in parity, not quite there. They get to parity when you remove the cost of the battery. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So now, prospects, what is it that makes this whole thing possible? There's a lot of investor interest. I just got off a call with Warren. I'm not sure he's on this call right now, but so I work with the Africa Electric Mobility Development Association, and we're investors are reaching out to us all the time saying, oh, we'd like to get involved in this. What's the route to go? We're always hearing about, folks who are involved in renewable energy or involved in other ventures starting to invest in electric mobility. Several multi-million-dollar raises have made headlines these years. So there's a lot of interest from investors in terms of grants, equity, debt, and that's all really important. Another thing is battery swapping. This is what's really, really, really interesting to me personally. So this is what Zembo is doing in Uganda with more than 200 motorcycles. In Rwanda and Kenya, you have Ampersand. They have like 400 motorcycles now running on the road. ARC, Fika, several other players are all pursuing this. Max, I think in Nigeria is still kind of figuring it out. In Ghana, you have Kofa. And basically the idea is that you set up a station where you can come up and you can take the battery out like the man is doing in the photo and take out your used one, which is maybe only got 20-30% of the battery left. You put in a fully charged one and you drive off. It takes the same amount of time as a petrol station, which is really important, of course, because you can't be wasting time for an Okada guy. And you drive off and you charge for the cost of electricity. That is the difference in electricity of the two batteries. So what this does, this removes waiting time, which is really, really important. This removes the cost of the battery from the motorcycle. Like I said, the cost of the battery is the biggest expense in an electric vehicle. So by doing this, you put that cost on the owner of the swap station. And then instead they recoup that cost through charging for the battery swap service. Yeah, and then you don't have to worry about whether, you know, folks have access to electricity at home and whatnot. In places which have dirtier grids and you want to focus on providing a cleaner service, you set up solar at that station. Fantastic. There you go. You've got solar charged motorcycles. Although I would also like to point out, though, that because of the improved efficiency of an electric grid over an engine vehicle, even charging an electric vehicle on a dirty grid, at least for smaller vehicles, I know, still reduces the amount of carbon dioxide and other emissions that are released into the atmosphere. And the other thing too is that you're shifting those emissions from certain places. So right now, vehicle driving on the street, it releases air pollutants right there. But if you put that in a power plant that's outside the city, you're moving that away from humans and you're moving that away from damage to human health. Anyway, battery swapping is something that we all should be thinking about, and you know, is this a long route? Well, a lot of people are betting on it. Another thing, a little piece of good news. Like I said, electricity access is expanding across the continent, as you can see from this map of places with new on-grid systems. Mini grids, really interesting idea. I know Nigeria had that very progressive mini grid law back in 2016, 2017. Don't know what happened with that. Would love to hear from folks. But I know one of the issues there is just that mini grids, the cost of electricity from a mini grid is very high. And so that might make them more difficult. So grids are a lot better option for that. But overall, it's a positive picture, and we just need to keep pushing for improved access. And then finally, another thing that's really key here is that there's a lot of companies that want to get involved in financing these vehicles, especially motorcycles. So one of the issues, of course, if you're trying to build an EV company, is that you've got to buy all these vehicles and then you sell them on a lease, right? Okay, at least this is what happens in East Africa. My understanding is that in Nigeria, it's something like 30% of vehicles are bought up front, and then the rest are sort of bought with money borrowed from friends and family. And so I think Watu is moving into West Africa, I'm not sure. But anyway, these folks, you know, you pay maybe the equivalent of around $100 up front, and then you pay off the rest over 2 years so that you can own your motorcycle at the end of it. They're all very interested in moving to EVs. I mean, they all have shareholders that tell them, come on, like, let's get electric vehicles on the road. We don't want to keep putting ICE vehicles on the road. So Watu, Mogo, Move, Tugende, Asak, they're all actively looking into or have already started partnerships with people financing electric vehicles. So that helps for people who have to start a whole new EV company. And when you do that, I mean, you have so many different things that you're doing, right? You're selling a motorcycle, you're financing a motorcycle, you're financing the batteries, you're building a battery swapping network. Maybe you're thinking about insurance, you're probably maintaining them as well. So this is a way to remove those costs and that bother from your business. Finally, just a couple of sort of spare thoughts here, which is that Urban areas are going to be electrified much faster because A, the grid is already there. B, the density, you need density, right? Like if you're trying to set up in a rural area, you want to set up a battery swap network. You put up, one in a small town. Okay, well, people from there, they're going into the village and coming back from the village every day. Those are long distances. If you get stranded there with an empty battery, that's a problem. And there's not many people taking those routes. But cities, I mean, you're constantly moving. It's very dense. It's much easier and financially to set up a battery swap network. So the rural areas it's gonna be a while in the rural areas. And additionally, EVs on average have around 50% of the maintenance costs because there's just a lot fewer parts. That's another plus, right? Especially for commercial operators like Okadas, et cetera. Because you're thinking, okay, I no longer have to pay for oil every 2 weeks, right? I no longer have to think about the engine breakdown, whatever. But also that's downtime, right? Where like, okay, you have to go and get a service. That's an hour you're not working, an hour you're not making money. So that's another plus shifting to EVs. So that's it from me.
All right, thank you so much, Thomas Cartwright. That's a good one there, getting to know that there are great things happening there. Okay, I can see questions coming in. You can still send in your questions. Before that, able to just answer the polls. Yeah. So it's been a nice presentation all through. Like it was an eye opener, and I love how concise the panelists were. Then I have few questions from everyone. Yeah. So kindly do well to answer the polls that will be popping up on your screen. Thank you. So my first question is for Isaac. The question is, how long do the battery packs lasted? You talk about the creation of battery packs for the converted electric bicycles. So how long do the battery packs last?
Thanks for that. So just to be a little bit clear, is the person talking about, is the question asking how long the battery packs last after a full charge, or how long the battery packs last after? Well, anyways, I'll just answer both anyways. So in our case, on paper, I mean, the battery packs, all of the cells are supposed to last a good 200 charge discharge cycles. Bring that to years, that's about, give or take, 5 years. That's on paper, but we know that practically things are a little bit different than what is on paper. So in practical terms, because of the way it's being used, environmental factors as well as some other factors, that length of 5 years could be reduced to, let's say, 4 years. If they are also well taken care of, they could outlast the 5 years that is being stipulated. That is for how long the packs can last. But when you're talking about, if you are asking how long it takes for the battery packs to last after a full charge, for our particular use case, we measure that in terms of distance covered rather than the time, because everyone's driving or riding cycle is different. So it doesn't really depend on the time, but rather how far you can travel before your packs run out. So in our case, we can go a good 150 kilometers, between 150 kilometers to 180 kilometers on a single charge, and then you would have to charge your vehicles, like your motorbike or your motorbike again. I hope that answers the question. Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. We can hear you. Sorry, I didn't know that I was muted. So thank you for answering the question. So I'll tilt over to Jane. So Jane, considering transition to EVs, what happened to the benefit? Any consideration to the environmental effects it will cause in Africa? So I guess this question is talking about battery waste.
Yes, there is something we call end-of-life vehicle. There are end-of-life vehicle industry. Like these are recycling plants that work on some parts of vehicles after they have reached the end of their end of life. Although there's still end of life vehicle technology is not as advanced in the electric e-mobility space as it is with internal combustion engines. But to even answer this, to be more specific to Africa, in the first place, a lot of African, I won't be specific because I don't have the statistics, but based on experience, a lot of African countries don't even have facilities to handle end-of-life vehicle technical aspects of normal vehicles. So which still goes back to what I was speaking about in terms of regulation. There are regulations governing all these aspects of vehicles. So with the right regulations in place, there should be end-of-life vehicle. For instance, in Europe, there's something they call the end-of-life vehicle directive, which has been put into place to determine how end-of-life vehicles will be handled to reduce waste and pollution on the environment. So in Africa, this can also be affected, definitely, but it just has to be passed into regulation, and countries should be willing to do what they are meant to do, not just having cars that reach their end of life and then park it by the roadside. That is what contributes a lot to pollution, because we don't have these facilities in place in Africa, but you have these facilities in different parts of the world. So yes, this is something that is key, but action needs to start at the regulatory level and be passed on to the national level.
All right, thank you so much, Jane, for that answer. So I'll move over to Thomas. Question says, what's the benefit of using NMC over live PO4, and which one is best for EVs?
Yeah, good question. So for people who aren't familiar, NMC and LFP or LiFePO, but I find LFP is easier to say, are both types of lithium-ion batteries. So the difference, NMC has been dominant for a long time, right? They were used by Tesla for a long time, but people are kind of shifting to LFPs right now. And the primary advantage that NMC has is about density. So NMC batteries are much more dense. You can have more energy capacity in a lighter, smaller battery. But that's kind of the only, which is a very important advantage, but it's also kind of the only advantage. So LFP batteries are now cheaper, slightly cheaper. Really importantly, they have less safety issues, right? So they're much less likely to catch fire. To me, that's important in an early market, right? Because if you get 1 or 2 videos of an electric, motorcycle catching fire while it's charging, and that goes around on WhatsApp, it can really spoil a reputation. So I think that's quite important. And critically, LFP batteries, theoretically at least, should have longer lifespans. They should be able to be charged and discharged more times than NMC batteries. And that's really important when you think about lifetime costs and when you're thinking about lifetime usage. So personally, I come down on the side of LFP, but I do understand why some people are still pushing for NMC because of the density issue.
All right, thank you very much. So this question, I'm going to throw it to the 3 of you. What can you say about battery standardization in Africa? The standardization of EVs battery in Africa. Thomas Cartwright, you could go first, or anyone.
Sure. So battery standardization. Yeah, it's a good question. I just fielded this question this morning as well. I mean, long term, it needs to happen, right? Think about petrol station, right? You don't you can go to any petrol station if you have an ICE vehicle. We need to do the same thing for batteries so that we can swap batteries at any station, etc. I don't know whether that's going to come from companies coming together or whether that's going to come from government saying, okay, you all need to provide you need to agree on a battery standard. It needs to be, 72 volts, and it needs to have X, Y, and Z. So we'll see what happens with that. But to me, it's not a high priority right now, but in about 3 years or so, it will be. I think it can also come about when, a battery company comes in and they want to work with multiple electric motorcycle companies. And so they kind of force those electric motorcycle companies to work with their battery. So it might happen a couple different ways, but I don't view it as a high priority right now.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Can you come again with the question? I think my network was misbehaving, so I didn't catch the full thing.
Oh, okay. We're talking about battery standardization in Africa, and Thomas Cartwright said he doesn't think that's a priority right now, but he thinks in the next 2 to 3 years that should be. Would you still want to comment on that?
I would like to say something on that personally.
Okay.
I feel I might disagree with him a little bit though, because I feel standardization in any industry wise is necessary, is very important. And part of the, for instance, just to debate it, like there are actually new vehicles in Africa that are not as safe as used vehicles that are being imported into Africa. Why? Because they don't accede to any standards. And that's why sometimes you have an accident, you have the part of the top of the vehicle goes up, the lower part goes, it's like the vehicle literally scatters. But usually if this vehicle have been manufactured according to proper standards and regulations, you don't have such incidents. There is a UN regulation 100. I could put a link to that. Maybe if you want to see some of the UN regulations that are in existence, you could go there. That addresses issues relating to batteries actually. So there are standards in place. I just think it would take the government or the politicians, I don't like using that word, but for lack of a better word, I'll use that. I'll say the government to come into place and accede to some of these standards before it's able to go down into maybe the private sector. I don't think a private sector individual can just start acceding to standards that are not being acceded to around his environment. So I think standards are very important in my opinion.
If I could jump back in there quickly. Yeah, I should have properly clarified. When I say battery standard, I'm talking about mandating a specific type of battery, right? What I'm saying is that we definitely do need to have standards around safety, 100%, but there are more specific technical questions that are not going to be as affected by safety, like that question of, are you going to use 48 volts versus 72 volts? And I just don't think government should mandate things that specific. They should just ensure that people are held up, that manufacturers are held up to a certain degree of safety.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
It looks like what I wanted to say.
Okay. All right, then back to Isaac. So you talked about skills development, right? And we know that skills development is an opportunity within the e-mobility sector. And you get discussions of skills transferability. Can people transfer the skills they already have from fuel vehicles to the electric vehicles? So I just want you to talk a bit about skills development and skills transfer. And also a question was asked, is your female engineering training virtual, and is it open to people in other countries, African countries like Nigeria? Okay,
so I'm going to answer the second one first. So yes, initially the engineering training was an in-person training, but due to the onset of COVID, we had to find ways of, we had to be smart about that. So we transitioned to a virtual training platform. However, we still recommend that after the virtual training, after going through the virtual training, we still offer the opportunity for those who have been trained to come for an in-person training as well, because I mean, the virtual training can only be a lot of talk, but we feel like if you are able to participate hands-on, you'll be able to solidify whatever it is you were told or whatever it is you learned on the virtual platform. So for now, our engineering training occurs in 2 folds. We have the virtual training, and then we also have the in-person training, at least for those who can come for that in-person training. Otherwise, the virtual tool is fine. And at the moment, no, it is not open to everyone outside Ghana for now. The training just happens inside within Ghana alone. I don't know, maybe somewhere in the future we may open up that training to people in other countries as well. However, we do partner with other institutions in other parts of the country to offer these kind of trainings. Currently, we are currently in talks with one e-mobility company in Senegal, Imbe Mobility. So, and as part of those talks, we are to come there and then offer some of these trainings to technicians and people who already own garages in that area, so they can also up their skills up a notch. So, so that is that on the training. And yes, like skill acquisition, it's super important because as at the time that I went to the university, we did not even have an automobile. We didn't even have an automobile department at the engineering college. We did not have anything like that. So obviously, we realized that in the absence of such things, it becomes very difficult for people to acquire the skills they need in the EV space. And just like Jane mentioned earlier, the future is EV, and whether we like it or not, the future is going to be green. So it is imperative that as fresh graduates, or even people within, or people who have some knowledge working on cars, we need to also up our knowledge and our skills in the realm of EVs. So for those of us, or for those of you who already own garages, skill transfer is important, yes, because besides the electrical parts of the EV, everything else about the electric vehicle is just like any of the conventional vehicles that we have. The tires are the same, the braking systems, well, are relatively the same, the steering, well, relatively the same. I mean, spraying, basically everything. Basically, if you have any knowledge working on conventional cars, you should be okay working on EVs as well. But then you'd also need to upgrade your skills, because I mean, if it's not always going to be about working on tires and working on brakes and then working on steering systems or whatnot. There's more to it. There are more to EVs, and as such, it's imperative that we find ways of also upgrading our skills. So it doesn't matter whether you can work on conventional cars, your skills are still required when it comes to working on EVs as well.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. That was great. So okay, kindly answer the last poll on your screen. I'm very sure a photo popped up. Kindly answer that. Thank you very much. So while we answer that, sorry, excuse me. Thomas, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on charging the battery
I'm sorry, I missed
charging
that.
the battery swaps using different grids depending on, okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please, sorry.
Okay, I said, what are your thoughts on charging the battery swaps using different grid options as opposed to, can you hear me? Are you getting the question? As opposed to depending on grid electricity.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
do you think it's a viable option?
Yeah, so I have a friend who is working in Sierra Leone, and fortunately, I don't think she's on this call, so I think I can tell the story. And you know, she's looking at putting electric motorcycles on a mini grid, and the problem is just that. So max, you know, what you're paying for grid electricity is about 20 cents, right? In some places, it's much lower, like 10 cents, 5 cents. But you need the difference between the cost of, electricity and the cost of petrol, because ultimately you want to sell people something that costs less than petrol so that they're saving money, right? So you need that difference to make up for the cost of the battery. But mini grid electricity is very expensive because of the simple fact that you're using solar on a tiny scale, right? When you have a larger scale, you can sell it for much cheaper. A lot of the time, mini grid electricity is around 50 cents. So if you're doing battery swapping, then I don't really think it's all that viable to do it at the same cost. I think if you do battery swapping on a mini grid, then people are going to be paying more for their energy. Maybe they'll save enough on the maintenance that it won't matter, but I kind of doubt it. However, if, for example, the battery if it's being charged on a mini grid instead, right? Then you could be below the cost of petrol. Now, I don't think that's the case in a place with heavily subsidized petrol like Nigeria, but in other places, you can stay below the cost of petrol with the mini grid, but you're not going to be doing battery swapping, or you're going to be doing it in a situation where a particular company, say, I don't know, a large scale farm or a telecoms company, where they don't have to think about that, where they can put down all of the upfront costs and pay for all of it upfront, and recoup the cost in their own way, or not even worry about that because maybe they're saving from switching from something else. So all of that is to say, if you're doing it for battery swapping Okadas, I don't really think it works. If you're doing it for a company's fleet where they own them entirely, or they're not doing 100 kilometers a day or something like that, then I think it can be more viable.
All right. Thank you so much, Thomas, for that answer. So before we round up, we want to play back Anika's presentation. We didn't finish it. So are we ready for that? Mr. Anthony?
Confirm you can see my screen, please. I'm sorry for this. We've been having some technical challenges today. Quite a lot. Yeah. So please confirm you can see this and you can hear the audio.
I can't hear the audio.
Okay. Okay, so what I think we'll do is I'll put this presentation, it will be on our YouTube channel. And so if you go to YouTube and search for TONIPASH Energy, you have this alongside the recording. And if you're interested, I think that would be the easiest way of accessing it. So, you can use that because our time is fast spent, and I wouldn't want to keep our audience any longer than scheduled. So I want to, on behalf of TONIPASH Energy, okay, before we get to that, before we say the closing remarks, could we please just turn on a video for a second? Let's have a screenshot. Copy, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, while that is going on, I want to thank her much for the insights you've shared today. It's been really amazing. My colleague just messaged me that she has really gotten a lot of insights from the knowledge you shared today. This is part of what TSEC seeks to achieve, because the knowledge gap could, as much as Isaac mentioned that they carry out training in their organization, this interface or this platform where we can exchange knowledge about what is happening in our organization, and this one also talks about what is happening in the organization, even bringing in the country, a specific country context into it also helps in sharing information and knowledge, and also it helps the industry grow bigger. So thank you so much for the time you've taken. It's been really hectic yesterday and today, but I want to thank you so much on behalf of TONIPASH Energy. And we hope you avail us your time again when we call on you sometime soon, because we'll come knocking again. So as part of series, by next month, we'll also be looking at the role hydropower is playing in the continent. That will be at TSET 7, because the rave now is about solar, but we all know, I want to say deep inside us, that hydropower still plays a large role in the energy mix in the country, in the continent. So we'll also look at what is happening in that area. We'll bring in experts in the hydropower space to discuss about development in hydropower, especially the small hydros, which can also provide mini grid services and solutions to especially the rural dwellers, which are having much of the energy challenges we are facing. So I want to thank you very much. I don't know. I thought my Veronica is here, but I think she has left the call. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for logging in. Thank you for the insights you've shared. And our audience, I want to thank you so much. The questions too were quite insightful, because I got one or two things from there too for this. And I'm hoping that by next time we send the invites out, you also join us to sometimes the audience too also share insights on what they know. So thank you so much, and I wish you a happy rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.